Dear participants, I hope you had a nice lunch break. We'll now resume the afternoon session. So in the morning, we heard from UNDP, OECD, PRI, National Australia Bank, and APG Asset Management. They were describing how banks and investors are using the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. For this afternoon session, we are conducting a training session where we will use a case study and poll questions to guide our discussion. We want you to participate actively in the session, so please do make full use of the Q&A box, and we will cover as many questions and comments as possible. So without further ado, I would like to present to you Ms. Ghislaine Nadaud, your trainer for this session. Ghislaine started her career as an attorney and practiced corporate and employment law in The Hague and Amsterdam. Ghislaine joined ABN AMRO as a legal counsel in 2006 and moved into her specialization in sustainable banking policy and risk management in 2011. Moving to Asia in 2016, Ghislaine was instrumental in setting up the ABN AMRO's first ever regional sustainability department for its corporate and institutional banking business. In her role as the Asia Pacific head of sustainability for ABN AMRO, she was driving the bank's agenda on human rights due diligence, value chain management, and sustainable finance. She also maintained ABN AMRO's active involvement at various regional multi-stakeholder forums and partnership, such as the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, the RSPO, the Asia Pacific Loan Market Association, APLMA, and UNEP-FI. Currently, Ghislaine holds a visiting researcher position at the Asia Pacific Center for Environmental Law at the National University of Singapore. So, as you may have guessed, Ghislaine joins us from Singapore. Thank you, Ghislaine, for leading the training session. I'll act as your assistant. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Yuki. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm very much looking forward to doing this session with you and to share some of practical experiences from the palm oil sector. As mentioned by Yuki, within my work for ABN AMRO, I've been involved in developing human rights methodologies for various sectors. When I moved to Asia, it was really about implementing them on the ground. And I hope that we can have a discussion on that. And with that, I will share the screen. Yeah. And go to the session structure and workshop objective of today. So the session is really meant to raise awareness and discussions on what FIs can do to implement the UN guiding principles, human rights due diligence in agriculture, how do we put policies in practice, and how to create leverage to mitigate human rights risks. We have a case study that we will discuss. The case study was shared, but I will go through it briefly. We hope to have an interactive session, so we also prepared polls based on the case study, and then we will look into what are the human rights risks in the palm oil industry and what can you do as an FI to mitigate those risks. And then there will be a closing. So the case study that we shared is the following. You are a relationship manager at an international bank based in Thailand and part of the agri-commodities team. The palm oil outlook for 2021 looks very good, and your team wants to build up a palm oil portfolio. There's a prospect, company Y, based in Indonesia, that has approached you and is requesting a loan. The company is planning to expand its activities and is looking for funding. Company Y is a mid-tier palm oil player and main trader, mainly selling in the Asian market. The company has a few palm oil plantations, but mainly sources its palm oil from other companies in Indonesia. And it has mainly short-term contracts with most of its suppliers. A code of conduct is applicable to all its suppliers. However, long-term suppliers are subjected to additional requirements. And one of Y's long-term suppliers is in a replanting program at the moment. And the program has recently been disrupted by protests of local communities because of land claim disputes. Company Y has published its sustainability commitments on its corporate website and is a member of the RSPO. Company Z is Y's key buyer and is a listed company in Indonesia and one of the largest palm oil companies in the world. Company Z has a no deforestation, no peat and no exploitation policy, a so-called NDPE policy, which is applicable to its own operation as well as to its entire supply chain. Company Z exports 40% of its products to China, 30% to Europe, and the remaining is for domestic use. Unilever and Nestlé are both off-takers from Company Z. And while drafting your credit proposal, you come across the following. A large NGO has published a report flagging severe human rights issues in the palm oil industry. In its report, it has found serious human rights abuses on the palm oil plantations of subsidiaries of the palm oil company Z, as well as its suppliers and sub-suppliers. These included forced labor and child labor on Malaysian plantations, gender discrimination, as well as exploitative and dangerous rampant working practices, such as lack of protective equipment, long working hours that put the health of workers at risk. The abuses identified were allegedly not isolated incidents, but arose from systemic business practices across the sector. In particular, the low level of wages, the use of piece rates, and the use of complex system of financial and other penalties. The report also criticizes global consumer goods companies, such as Unilever and Nestlé, and others for allegedly turning a blind eye to the exploitation of workers in their supply chain, despite public promises that there will be no exploitation in their supply chain. So it's a complicated, well, you're not so happy with this discovery, and it's well known, I could say, that the palm oil sector is not such an easy sector, but what we also know is that palm oil is a very important crop worldwide. There is no alternative, and millions of people depend on this sector. So what we are going to discuss are the following questions. Identify and assess adverse human rights impacts, and how do you create leverage on human rights within your organization? And I would like to pause briefly to see if there are any questions so far.
I cannot see any in the chat box at the moment, so let's proceed.
Okay, thank you. Then we will start with the first poll question. Yes. Select the two most significant human rights risks you identify in this case study. And we will wait a moment to give you the opportunity to fill in the case of the poll.
Ghislaine, I'm monitoring the response right now. So
yes.
We have just over 40 now. We'll wait for a few more. It's coming up. So let's wait a few more minutes until everyone has voted.
Perfect. Let me know when we have enough.
Yeah.
To continue.
So dear participants, we will be closing soon. So please vote if you have not yet done so. Okay, I think we can stop and reveal the response. Yeah, we will stop now. Okay, can you show the response? Can you do that on screen? We'll share the response on screen. Here you go.
So clearly that labor rights and health and safety are selected most often. And secondly, child labor. Thirdly, forced labor. And then, yeah, interesting outcome. Thank you so much for your participation, and we will dive into the case. I will close this one. So this is a general human rights risk heat map on agricultural and fisheries sector, and where you can see, which is also in line with the poll here, both forced labor, the labor issues are highly rated, but mainly child labor and local and indigenous people's rights and living wage and living income. And this heat map is a generic and easy tool, so it gives a high-level indication on what are the risks in these sectors. And what is important to mention is the risk. You should identify them based on scale, gravity, scope, the number of people involved. Is it remediable, and the likelihood of the risk to occur. So this gives us a very high-level indication of what are the human rights risks that are at stake. And as a next step, we can use various draw on sector and industry initiatives supporting the implementation of the UN Guiding Principles. What was already mentioned as well this morning is there is a lot of information available. And yeah, you should make use of that information based on, of course, the sector that you will finance, based on the type of finance. But if we look at our case study, there are a couple of initiatives that are relevant. First of all, the Dutch Banking Agreement. The Dutch Banking Agreement is a multi-stakeholder initiative that was initiated to improve adhering banks' performance with respect to the UN Guiding Principles and the OECD guidelines. And it gives guidance on human rights policy commitments, human rights due diligence, and client engagement, transparency, and remediation. And why is this one relevant for this sector? They have published a couple of sector analyses, one on gold, one on cocoa, and one on palm oil. That gives us information to check what was the outcome of their research. The research is also interesting because the participants of the Dutch Banking Agreement were banks, obviously, the Dutch government, but also NGOs and labor unions. So all the relevant stakeholders involved. Some background on this is that it took quite some time to get to this agreement, to work together, because there was this, I think this started 6 years ago. It took some time to get everyone, it took some time to get to know everyone and to build the trust as well among banks, NGOs and labor unions. But as we will touch upon later on as well, this collaboration is really key to have a positive impact in the sector and to manage human rights. The second one, and this is of course a very relevant one, is the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, the RSPO. The RSPO is a multi-stakeholder platform representing the various players in the palm oil industry, so the entire value chain, environmental NGOs and social NGOs. And the RSPO has developed a set of environmental and social criteria, including human rights. with the last review of the principles and criteria in 2018, there was a specific emphasis on human rights. So they strengthened their human rights criteria. And they also have a human rights working group, which works on developing tools and guidance to support human rights due diligence in the sector and provides specific guidance on FPIC, labor, children's rights, human rights defenders, and decent living wage. And all these tools and guidance are publicly available and published on their website. So this is also an important source to get information to do your due diligence. And there are also other initiatives, as mentioned previously as well by other speakers. The Equator Principles, relevant, particularly looking into project financing. Also, the Equator Principles came with enhanced human rights standards just last year. They also have developed guidance on this and the principles for responsible banking. So depending on the sector that you finance, I advise you to look, is there a sector initiative and what are they doing on human rights? So based on the human rights heat map, the poll as well, and the due diligence done by the DBA, the Dutch Banking Agreement, and the RSPO, we see that especially in Indonesia, rights of indigenous people are at stake. In the poll, it was indicated as well that forced labor is an issue. That is an issue in the sector, but it's linked to country specifics. And what we see is that in Indonesia, there's not so much the risk of forced labor. That's mainly in Malaysia. And in that way, it's very interesting as my fellow speaker from NAB was mentioning, the modern slavery index with the country index will indicate what in what countries in specific sectors modern slavery is at risk. But here we're looking at rights of indigenous people. So what are these? What are we talking then about? So human rights impacts in the palm oil value chain, particularly those faced by indigenous people, smallholder farmers, and communities living near palm oil cultivation, and notably women in each of these groups, are often closely related with issues of land tenure. It is important to understand land rights are not restricted to land ownership alone, but also include use or access rights and decision-making rights. Land rights violations can have adverse impacts on food security, shelter, use of natural resources, other livelihood aspects, and can lead to discrimination against women, indigenous people, and their customary systems of rights. So a couple of examples to give some more idea of what we're talking about. So exclusion, communities do not have the right to determine who will have an access right and how rights may be transferred. Access to resources, indigenous people and other local communities no longer have the right to enter their cultural heritage and withdraw from using resources. Indigenous peoples and other local communities no longer have the right to obtain products of a resource site and use the available resources fundamental for satisfying their basic necessities.
Ghislaine, can I just stop you there and ask a question?
Yes.
So in the case study, there was a mention about the dispute with local communities, which probably flagged this kind of risk for the lender. If they didn't have that kind of information, where would they go and find that?
If this to see if the company is affected by these type of issues.
Yeah, exactly. Because I guess you are saying that there is an underlying risk that of human rights issues with indigenous communities in the palm oil sector in general. And in the case study, it was already flagged in a way that this could be an issue. But for in a real right, in a different scenario, let's say there wasn't any report like that saying that there is a local dispute. Would they still find it through like local papers, like local newspapers, or where do you think would be the easiest place to find out I guess what I'm saying is that indigenous communities, you cannot identify it just by looking at the concession rights of the company. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, if a palm oil company has concession rights, that is free from dispute, right?
Correct. Well, in general, you have to, because this is an issue that is relevant for the sector, your client should have a process in place to mitigate this, so to look into this, to apply FPIC. And indeed, if you have to do your research, of course, to see, is the client or suppliers of the client, are they, do they encounter these type of issues? So you can use several tools to see if there is bad press on the activities linked to the company. One of the tools that was used this morning is Business and Human Resource Center. So you can fill in the company name and look into any bad press related to human rights linked to the company. That is an open access tool. You can also use RepRisk. That is a paid tool, and that has all information, news. It's a database linked to various issues, sustainability issues, human rights issues in the sector, per company, per country, etc. So those are a couple of tools that you could use. Is that answering your question? And then, of course, public, public Google search tools.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ghislaine.
So in case people's rights are at stake, it's important to have implemented an FPIC process. As set out in the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, which has been endorsed by a large majority of states, free, prior and informed consent is required if activities will affect indigenous people's lands, territories or other resources that they traditionally own, use or occupy. And the FPIC process, the right to consent or consultation and negotiation, can help reduce social conflict as well as increase the legitimacy of a project in the eyes of all stakeholders and can thus provide a critical foundation for sustainable development. So maybe also coming back again to your question, Yuki. So it's important that a company that we finance, that we would finance, a palm oil company, is looking into really checking indeed, is there consultation with the communities? Is it reported? To make sure that FPIC is respected. And what all the analysis show is that the palm oil value chain is very complicated with many players involved. And the UN guiding principles state that you have to identify and assess human rights risks, not only in your own operations, but also within your supply chain and business relationships. So often what we see is that the company is not so much directly involved in human rights abuses, but that the issue or the rights of the risks are mainly in the supply chain. And if you can see here, this is an overview of the supply chain. It's a very complicated supply chain. So companies understand that the reputation of actors in the supply chain has a direct impact on their own reputation, which is why there should be efforts to ensure that their suppliers abide by the sustainability commitments and standards. And this can be done by effective engagement and management of suppliers within the extended supply chain, prioritizing suppliers for field assessments, planning for workshops and training for suppliers at different regions with prevailing issues. As such, potential non-compliances can be assessed and at-risk suppliers can be identified. So what we see in the palm oil value chain is that you have the main issues are at the source, at the upstream part, because there are so many players involved, smallholders, small growers. So we're talking about third-party plantations, etc. I've indicated this here in the middle is our client, our prospect. part of this value chain, part of Z's value chain. This is Z's value chain, but our client has to make sure that he has a good view on what the suppliers are doing and if they comply with sustainability standards. And we don't make a difference between short-term suppliers or long-term suppliers. So this is also indicated in the case that the company makes a difference between short-term and long-term suppliers, which would lead to a question mark and which would be a topic that we would like to further discuss with the company.
Ghislaine, just
Yes.
a clarification. So company Y is the, in your case study, company Y is the prospective client. That would be sitting underneath the round circle?
Yes, correct.
The one before that?
The round circle.
Oh, the round circle is company Y.
Yes.
Ah, okay. Understood.
And is the value chain of company Z.
Ah, okay. So this whole map is company Z's value chain.
Exactly.
I see. Okay, thank you.
And there are, as mentioned here, there are different tools available, developed to assess your suppliers. So again, this engagement with suppliers is very important, but often it's a sub-supplier. So you train your suppliers to engage with their suppliers or to be indeed aware of how their value chain looks like. So transparency in the value chain is very important to identify, are there any issues that we have to mitigate? And what we have seen from the poll, and as well linked to such a difficult supply chain, is that there are various labor rights at risk in the palm oil sector, next to the indigenous people rights. So workers on plantations, on family farms, in mills, refineries, manufacturing, and throughout the value chain have rights related to their labor relations with their employers. Due to the limited governance capacity of countries and the inherent risks in the production of palm oil, all labor rights are at risk. And the following, we have all labor rights are at risk, but some are severe. And as rightfully so indicated by the poll, this is one of these severe labor rights at risk is child labor. Children are affected by the palm oil sector as dependents of workers, members of a community, and as workers, and children help often their parents after school or on weekends and holidays to meet the high targets, earn bonuses, and avoid penalties. So also this system of high targets and bonuses and penalties is incentivizing the risk of child labor. And besides of that, work in the palm oil sector is heavy and hazardous and also not in line, therefore, with the ILO conventions that protect children. Health and safety, in the sector, a lot of chemicals are used and fertilizers. So people need to have adequate personal protective equipment, which should also be renewed, of course, if it's not in good condition anymore. Again, harvesting of palm oil is dangerous, so this personal protective equipment is very important. Discrimination. There's widespread gender discrimination on plantations. Women are generally only hired as casual workers. They don't have any contracts, which denies them social security benefits such as health insurance and pensions. And in addition to that, what we also see as a severe risk is decent living wage. And a decent living wage is, of course, impacting the livelihood of workers, impacting if they have children, the education of children. So this is an important area to look at. Workers and families working throughout the value chain have a right to an adequate standard of living, a fair wage or income. This is quite possibly the most widespread severe issue affecting a large number of people working in the upstream part of the value chain. So again, the farm side of the palm oil value chain. So examples of groups that are affected by this are plantation workers. Workers on plantations generally earn wages that are below the minimum standard to make a decent living. and often wages are tied upon production targets as mentioned before. And those production targets are often unrealistic to meet. Smallholder farming families depend on the farm's income, but this is usually not enough to ensure a decent standard of living. They are often price takers and therefore dependent on buyers and the market. And workers on smallholder farms. Large-size smallholder farms might hire workers, and this is often from the informal sector. So they are likely to work on the same poor conditions as the farmers themselves as well. And what we see, decent living wage, of course, it's what is the question will of course raise, what is a decent living wage? Depends per sector, depends per country, sorry. Again, here the RSPO gives information on this and gives an indication what would be a decent living wage. What are the tools that you can use to identify or classify a decent living wage? So coming back to our question that was included in the case study, I think what we see if we look at the heat map, if we look at the study that is done by the RSPO, the information that we get from the RSPO, the information that we get from the DBA, the key risks that are at stake are labor and indigenous people. Also, if we read the case study, the information included in the case study gives some red flags here. As mentioned by Yuki, the community issues, the issues with the community with regard to the replanting program. It's a very, our client prospect is a mid-tier company having a lot of suppliers, not using the same approach to due diligence to its short-term suppliers. So these are areas that we want to further engage with the company. And in the next part of the session, we are going to look into how do you engage, how do you use your leverage to mitigate potential adverse human rights impacts. But I would like to pause here briefly to ask if there are any questions or comments.
So Ghislaine, there isn't any yet, but would you go back to the case study and kind of go through what you just said, but in showing where it is that you think are the obvious, red flags that you would identify in this case study, and where it's requiring more information from the prospective client.
Yes, of course. So as mentioned, if you look into the palm oil sector, you know that per country the challenges are different. Malaysia, the issue of forced labor is really, that's really a big risk. In Indonesia, this company is only linked to Indonesia, so we don't have to. So that risk is less. You could say that's a lesser risk in this case. But Indonesia, as mentioned, we know that there are issues with land rights in general, and this is confirmed by that one of WISE long-term suppliers is in a replanting program, and that replanting program has been disrupted because of land claim disputes. So probably there is something wrong with the land rights. So this is something that we would like to further discuss, because we expect WISE to engage with its supplier on this. Then the next topic, what we see is that they have a code of conduct applicable to all of its suppliers, but they make a difference between long-term suppliers and short-term suppliers. It is advisable to not make a difference, but to apply strict, enhanced standards to all of the suppliers. So these are the main red flags that I would see, and I would also underline to company Y that this is important, that this is well managed, because company Z is Y's key buyer, and if company Z is not comfortable with company Y, it will stop sourcing. especially now if now there is such a report against Company Z, and Company Z is again and one of Unilever and Nestle are both off-takers from Company Z. So you see the entire value chain is included in this supply chain, but there's also a financial risk for Company Y if the company can't show that he is managing, he's fully complying to the NDPE policy.
So Ghislaine, being a member of RSPO is not just a tick box then, that you do need to look further into the company to do more stricter due diligence is what you're saying.
Being a member of the RSPO gives us comfort, but so one thing you should also check, some members of the RSPO, they have complaints against them, for example. They are still a member, but there are some issues, so it's always good to check the complaints that are handled by the RSPO. They're on its website, but you also still have to do your own due diligence. If a company is a member of the RSPO, that is not fully saying straight away, okay, we are comfortable enough and we don't have to look into any of these potential risks.
Okay, and from this case study, what kind of strikes me is how the palm oil sector is very vulnerable to reputational risk. That, you know, the report from the human rights NGO affects Company Z's reputation, and that it's not that they've done anything wrong today that is affecting the value chain, but that it's more like a reputational issue that triggers from accumulated risks that they have been holding within the industry?
Well, a report gives us information that we have to check, because I mean, this report, we know that there are issues in the value chain in the palm oil sector. And what is flagged by this report is that the entire system within the palm oil sector, so this using these targets, using penalties if you don't meet those targets, affects labor rights. So actually the industry itself has to do something about this. So it's not, I think, what we have seen following this report, because this report is an existing report, is that the RSPO took extra action and all the players took extra action, but of course it takes time. So I would say you always have to check a report. You have to discuss it with the NGO to learn more about the background, and of course discuss it with the client. And potentially there are indeed areas to improve, and then you have to sit together and discuss how can you improve those areas.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any questions from the floor or in the meantime?
No, we don't have any at the moment, but dear participants, please do raise your questions through the Q&A. In the meantime, we can move on.
Okay, then we have our second poll question. Can you help me with the...
Yeah, we are.
Thank you so much.
We are uploading it now.
So these are two questions. If we look into, I guess you are aware this morning, the steps of due diligence were discussed. We have now discussed step 2 of due diligence, identifying and assessing human rights risks. And now we are focusing on the other steps as well, using leverage to have a positive impact. So this poll has two questions. How do you create leverage on human rights within your organization? And how do you create leverage on human rights externally with external stakeholders? And we have listed a couple of examples, and please tick the ones that you think are most important two things, the first two things you will do?
So the first question is about within your organization, what two things will be most important to do? And the second question is about what you can do with external stakeholders. And you can choose two each for these questions. We'll give a few minutes for people to answer this question because it is a little bit more complicated to answer than the poll number one. I guess while we're waiting, just my general comment. I guess all of these are important. I mean, there are no unimportant things in here. So I guess we are talking about priority in terms of the first two things. So in terms of order and maybe also in terms of importance as well.
Correct. That's correct, Yuki.
Okay, we will close soon. So if you have not yet voted, please do vote now, and we will close in 1 or 2 minutes time. Okay, we will now close the poll. Thank you for participating, and we will show you the results.
So on the first, oh, let me see. Oh yeah, I thought I was on mute. So on the first question, governance on board commitments is clearly the winner. And secondly, the disclosure on human rights commitments. Very good. And the second question, include human rights in client engagement, 75%. And include human rights related topics in sustainable finance instruments. That's a very interesting outcome, and I'm happy to discuss this with you going forward. I will close this one. So as mentioned by Yuki, all of these, what we mentioned in the poll question, are important. Of course, it's good if there's nothing in place yet to prioritize. And I think what is important to mention that all are linked to each other as well. So that is what I wanted to show here. So as mentioned, leverage is the company's ability to influence the behaviors of others. And by using your leverage, you aim to have a positive impact and to seize, prevent, or mitigate adverse human rights risks. But leverage, how do you create leverage? Indeed, board commitment is, of course, very important. Knowledge, capacity on human rights is very important. Communication on this, NGO engagement, client engagement, sustainable finance, industry initiatives, they are all important. It's an entire ecosystem. You have to do all of them actually in the perfect world to create leverage. But indeed, we start with leverage via board and senior manager commitment. Also already discussed this morning, the tone at the top set by senior management is critical to ensuring the business takes respect. The business takes respect for human rights seriously. And the statement of policy can be an important tool, or is an important tool in this regard. Having a senior management champion can help kickstart internal conversations and signal the importance of the process. So internally, Human rights statements of policies should be approved at the highest level, at the most senior level of the business. What is also very good, I would say, is that there's a sustainability committee or an engagement committee or an ethics committee that regularly discusses human rights in practice, you could say. So we are focusing now in this case study on our role as a lender, but of course you have a role as an employee, a role as a service provider. So had to discuss challenges or positive developments on human rights. It's important to have that structure, to have a structure around that where senior management is included. This could also be to discuss the progress of your client engagement when there are human rights issues. To have senior management involved in this. So active involvement in client engagement. And then not only senior management from the bank, but also, of course, senior management from the company, the client that you finance, and taking also senior management to these meetings and to site visits. One other thing is as well, expand company reward and recognition systems to include respect for human rights, include creating awareness on human rights, for example, in KPIs. Is an example, and externally it really shows of commitment of senior management. If senior management is also actively involved in industry initiatives, like that senior management is taking part in discussions, for example, here in this case the RSPO, that there will be engagement with external stakeholders via conferences, organizing conferences as a bank as yourself. On human rights, corporate communication, etc. It's very important to include the human rights angle. Engagement with third parties, investment in innovative solutions. For example, in the palm oil sector, what we have seen is that blockchain is an initiative or a tool that can be used to increase transparency in this very difficult supply chain. And of course, it is great if you can contribute as a bank to this initiative, be a part of that, but then you also have to invest in this type of solution.
Ghislaine, we have a Q&A, a question in the Q&A box. So I'll read it out.
Yes.
Is being an RSPO member considered good enough by the industry standard, even though the company does not make any progress on their RSPO certifications after several years of being a member?
So the goal of the RSPO is to make sustainable palm oil the norm. And therefore, certified palm oil, the amount of certified palm oil has to increase. And commitments of the companies on increasing certified palm oil is, of course, is also an aspect that you take into account. So continuously improving is indeed important. So I would say I would definitely discuss why there's no change or improvement on this. What are the reasons for that? What is discussed within the in the palm oil sector as well within the RSPO is the shared responsibility, because there should be also enough offtake, enough buyers of certified palm oil. So every player in the palm oil value chain under the shared responsibility has a responsibility to support sustainable palm oil. So there are even targets set per sector, per player, per segment, I would say. For example, for the retail companies, that they have to source this amount of sustainable palm oil to make this, to make sure that we're going towards more sustainable palm oil and that there is enough offtake. As a bank, we also bankers also have a role to play in shared responsibility, meaning that they have to apply, of course, all the standards, that they have to engage with their clients on making sure that they comply with the RSPO standard, and also using sustainable finance as a tool to support sustainable palm oil.
Okay, thank you.
Then coming to one of the key leverage tools, of course, leverage via client engagement. Here is really where you can make a difference and where you can make an impact. And what follows, of course, also from the responsibility from the UN Guiding Principles. Comply or improve, not exclude. Exclusion is, following the UN Guiding Principles, really the last resort. So we have to engage with our client towards compliance. First, to start this engagement, well, I think it's important to have a process, a formalized engagement process, so that you know when do we start an engagement, what is necessary to start an engagement, what will be the objectives of the engagement, and when do we also say, with clear KPIs and timelines, how do we report on the engagement, and then we have to evaluate the results. So first of all, you determine the potential for client engagements is depending on your leverage. And what type of relationship do you have with the client? Do you have access to the client, direct access? Can you engage with the client? Is there capacity, resources to engage, and is there willingness from the client to have the conversation on this? You have to inform the client on the action plan, develop an action plan where you really state what are the areas to improve, and include also timelines. You could say 2 to 3 years is a normal applied timeline, but it all depends, of course, on the situation and the issue. Quarterly engagement, regular engagement with the client on the progress, on the action plan. It can be quarterly, it can be more often if necessary. And if necessary, an involvement of an external consultant. Sometimes the issues are very technical or you want to have an objective opinion on the progress. Tracking the progress, reporting all the engagement that conversations that you have is important. And at one point, you have to report internally. That is where it starts with. Engage your senior management, inform them on the progress, on your conversations, so that at one point you can make an evaluation and take a decision. The decision after an engagement is, well, we are happy with the results and we continue our relationship as regular, on a regular basis. We are not so happy with the engagement, but we see that there are reasons why not all the engagement objectives are yet met, and we feel comfortable to continue. You have to agree, of course, on new timelines and KPIs if that is necessary. But it could also be the engagement is not successful, we don't have leverage, we don't see the results, we don't see the willingness, and then this could lead to an exit of the relationship or not a renewal of the relationship. What we have seen in the past is that the comments of the NGOs often were, oh yeah, you engage with the company, what does it mean? You can't engage for years and years. We want to see the results, we want to see how you engage, what does it mean engagement? And of course you can't disclose this information because you have client confidentiality. But to have a formalized engagement process in place is really helpful internally as externally, especially if you're if we are financing a sector so difficult from many angles, the palm oil sector, depending on the country where you are, but the palm oil sector is very sensitive, so everyone internally and externally will raise questions about if you are active in this sector. So then it's good to communicate your progress internally, and you can only communicate it externally with consent of the client. That might be that the client find it important to also communicate to certain stakeholders that you are engaging with the bank, in this case, on improvement of the sustainability performance. I don't know if there are any questions about client engagement. So, well, all what I want to say is there should be meaningful engagement, and exit is really the last resort, but can be an outcome.
Ghislaine, what happens if the client is unwilling? What are the first things that you would think of to do when you approach a client and is not so willing?
Well, of course, you underline that this is key for the relationship, to continue the relationship. You underline that with senior management. Make it very clear to the company that this is very important. I think it's a difference if it's an existing client or a prospect. Here we're talking about a prospect. Yeah, if the company is not willing to work, to collaborate, yeah, I think you have to, yeah, you really have to think, do you want to enter into a relationship? Because not managing these risks is not only, it's not a nice to do, it can also pose an operational risk, a financial risk. So it's not in line with the bank's commitments, but it poses also potential financial risks. If it's an existing client, again, have this conversation and also see how you can increase your leverage with other tools. So refer to the company's own commitments to the RSPO, refer to its business, the other banks that are requiring these requirements as well. These are potential steps that you can take.
Ghislaine, I guess, so for a lot of Thai participants today, they would be in a position where they have existing clients and that they may be thinking of upgrading their human rights policies and other ESG policies in general. So in that case, it's more that the bank wants to, change and that the client is, an existing one. What would be the general recommendation for you to bring these kind of changes up with existing clients and that you are the one that wants to change?
Yeah, well, if you change your commitments, of course, the existing clients need to get time to comply with those commitments. I would, you have to inform your clients, of course, on the change in these commitments, and also to underline, I think it's always very important to underline the benefits of these commitments. Because indeed it is better business if you respect human rights. There are lesser risks, and what we see, of course, is the development, what was mentioned as well earlier today. There are so many developments going on the regulatory front, on companies that are implementing the UN guiding principles. So I would be surprised that that you are the only one who is asking these questions or who is asking these commitments. So it's only benefiting the client to guide them as well on complying with certain commitments. And you can advise them as well on these commitments, how to comply.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
But it will be a process, of course. It doesn't go overnight. But if you apply stricter criteria, you could also say that what you sometimes see with other criteria as well. If you upgrade your policy, those criteria will mainly be applied then in case of there is a new financing, or there will be indeed a timeline to be able to implement the updated requirements. Are there any other questions on this?
No, not at the moment.
Oh yeah, evaluate engagement process for engagement results on a regular basis. Very important. Leverage via engagement with NGOs. This is externally, you could say, also mentioned by Rosemary, a previous speaker. So collaboration on this topic is key. And NGOs, well, they are the eyes and the ears on the ground, so they have a lot of information which you require to do your due diligence, which is important for you to do proper due diligence. So depending, of course, the type of NGO, you have to identify the correct partners, which can be challenging. But certain NGOs are more active in certain sectors and have, are very well known. So you can use the NGOs to enhance your due diligence process and to get a better understanding of the rights of the people that are at risk. As mentioned as well this morning, input and feedback at policy level. If you draft your policy, sector policies, etc., it's very helpful to get feedback from the NGOs. You can help, you can, together with NGOs, you can do a joint capacity building, training, workshops, or roundtables that will make the picture complete. They have a lot of training material often available as well, and a lot of knowledge again there. It's access to a great network of relevant stakeholders, and an improved relationship with the NGO also positively impacts the reputational aspect. So if you are engaging with an NGO, they will first come to you, and if your relationship is good, they will first come to you if they see an issue and discuss it with you. Or ask your opinion before they publish the report, or before there's an article in the newspaper. And of course, it's maybe not so, you're not so comfortable to engage with NGOs. Yeah, I am originally from the Netherlands. I used to work for ABN AMRO. ABN AMRO is based in Amsterdam. And the benefit, well, that we had is that we have there is that the key NGOs are all based in the Netherlands. So you're very used to engage with NGOs. But as mentioned, 10 years ago when I started working on sustainability, it was very uncomfortable, but you have to build up that relationship, and you really see that you can help each other, or well, that this is a positive, can be a positive relationship. And that also then can lead to an opportunity to sustainable finance, which was indicated in the poll as well. We see there's a huge development on sustainable finance and so-called sustainability-linked loans, where you agree with your client on KPIs, sustainability-related KPIs. And if the company meets those KPIs, they get a discount on the loan. If they don't meet the KPIs, they get a penalty on the loan. But to define those KPIs relevant for the company, and they can be related to social impact, you can engage with the NGO to define ambitious and impactful KPIs. So I think there it's also relevant. A role as a bank as well with your client's relationship is that you can act as a mediator. If there's an NGO that has very negative views on a company, or is stating certain things, and well, it's not clear if that's the correct situation. The company is, of course, different view, has a different view. The relation is not so good that they really talk to each other, but you can mediate. You can mediate between parties, and that can result in that an NGO will not publish a report, for example. So that is a role that you can play as well as a bank. I don't know if there are any questions on this.
No, not from the participants. Let me ask a question on NGO engagement. So if a bank is not used to engaging with NGOs, would it be easier for them if they do this with other banks through, say, the Banking Association or other collaborative platforms?
Yes, I can definitely think that would be a good way to do that. For example, if we again focus on the palm oil sector, and the RSPO, environmental and social NGOs are a member of the RSPO. So if you go to conferences, etc., I would suggest that to plan a meeting with them and to have a discussion, just to get to know each other, and to hear their views on. All the NGOs have views on what the financial institutions should do, and come up probably with advice and critical comments maybe. But it's, I mean, it's good to have an understanding of that, and to listen to that and to take that into account and to take potentially action. But that is how you can start with the engagement. And that is, the RSPO is one example, but indeed you have other platforms as well. And I always have seen that the NGOs are very open to engage with banks.
Yeah, thank you.
Then finally, some other leverage tools, also indicated in the poll. Reporting is part of the human rights due diligence cycle. And you are responsible to communicate to your stakeholders what the outcome has been of due diligence, what the actions are that you have taken, and what are the gaps to work on, all in line again with client confidentiality. But we really see that, and I think BankTrack was also mentioned this morning. They come up with every year with a human rights benchmark. They also look into reporting, and what they say, well, most of the banks report on their that they have a human rights commitment, but there's no reporting on what does that mean? What does the bank do in implementation on the UN guiding principles, and also what are the results on engagement, or what are the challenges that you face as an organization? And what you see, there are a couple of companies, of course, corporates have published human rights reports, but also a couple of banks, and that you see that they are just open on, okay, these are the gaps, these are the challenges that we face, but we are planning to address these challenges the coming year by doing this, this, this. And I think that is really well accepted, that you are open about the situation and about where you are. I think it's better than not communicating or not being so transparent. Internal and external capacity building, that takes time, of course, but as mentioned, there are so many initiatives out there, sector initiatives, but also specific initiatives for the financial sector. So sector initiatives like the palm oil, but you also have for cocoa, you also have for coffee, for soy. If we talk about agri-commodities, fishery, there are a lot of initiatives there are initiatives there as well, but also initiatives among banks and FIs. Like the UNPRI, like UNFI, Principles for Responsible Banking. So if you are a member of these type of initiatives, I always think you should be an active member, and there's make the most out of it. You learn a lot, and you can bring a lot as well to the other participants. And as mentioned, include human rights related KPIs and sustainable finance instruments. Sustainable finance, all the banks are doing sustainable finance, so that gives also an opening to include human rights related KPIs and sustainable finance. Of course, this is different than risk management, and this is on top on managing your risks, but it is an opportunity to have extra positive impact. I don't know if there are any questions on this. Then we will come indeed to our final question of link to the case study. How do you create leverage on human rights so that the credit committee is comfortable to approve the loan and enter into a responsible relationship? So as mentioned, we have flagged a couple of issues in the case study, and from the information that we have available. FPIC and supplier due diligence. So I would suggest to the credit committee that we see that there is a non-compliance with our policy, the checklist that I provided you as well. But we are comfortable to continue under conditions, with conditions that we would agree on client engagement following the engagement process with the following KPIs. The company should develop improved supplier due diligence to short-term and long-term suppliers. The company should improve the FPIC implementation, and they should report on their process externally as well. These could have, of course, we will further discuss the KPIs, but then we see that with the formal client engagement process, we suggest to approve the loan, and that we will report back to the credit committee on a quarterly basis. In addition, we will become an active member of the RSPO. And we also invite senior stakeholder of senior management to be involved in the client engagement. And we will plan a meeting with the NGO that has published the report to get more information and background on the report and how to mitigate the risks that were flagged in the report, and to hear the NGO view. So then I think that would be my suggestion as a relationship manager to the credit committee.
Ghislaine, do you think there is a possibility that this could actually be turned into a good thing, like a sustainability linked loan that you were referring to earlier?
Well, we have, as soon as the company has met the KPIs that we have defined in our engagement process, I think that would be definitely the case. I think otherwise there would be a bit hesitance still, because this is a new client, and we first want to see what is the real commitment, etc. And can we expect progress before we enter straight into a sustainability-linked loan?
Right.
And this is because of their non-compliance with the sustainability criteria.
Mm.
So I would suggest that for a sustainability-linked loan, you should be at least compliant with all the criteria.
Right. So you need to work on the negatives first before the client needs to work on the negatives first before they can apply for a sustainability-linked loan then.
Yeah, in this case, I would definitely follow that approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There are no questions, remarks?
No.
Then I come to my final slide. Again, I think, well, a lot of repetition, but it is an ongoing process, which requires continuously learning, innovation, and collaboration to achieve progress. And you should continuously seek to foster an environment for yourselves and your business relationship that is conducive to respecting human rights through addressing risks and impacts connected to your business and contributing to solutions for the pressing social challenges of our time. And as mentioned, collaboration with other stakeholders is key. This is not something, I mean, we as a bank, you have to take action, but you have to work together on this to get results and to have a positive impact. So what could you do indeed? How could you start a collaboration? For example, indeed, to sit together with other banks, with your peers, to discuss how to implement the UN guiding principles, to attach yourself to an industry initiative relevant for your business. So if you are large in agri-commodities and specific agri-commodities, really think about becoming a member of these initiatives and use them to improve, to learn and to implement the UN guiding principle requirements. Be transparent about what you're doing, and more stakeholders will ask questions going forward on how you are implementing the UN guiding principles. And this is also an ongoing process. So you can start with some communication, then formalize it more and expand the communication. I have listed as well in the case study existing materials and tools that are available that can help you with doing your due diligence. There are free open source tools, and certain tools are paid ones. So you can check those. And then this is my final slide. Thank you for your attention, and I don't know if there are any more questions from the audience.
Yes, there is one. So let me read it. What are some ways we could integrate human rights to enterprise risk management? From your experience, would that be an effective, good pathway?
Yes, I think, it is the best way is to integrate this into existing risk management systems, and to add it in existing risk management systems. As mentioned previously, there's a slight difference with ENS risk management, environmental and social risk management approach, because this is about risks to people and not to business. But I would definitely integrate it in existing systems.
Yeah. Just to add that the UN Principles for Responsible Banking builds on the environmental and social risk management and adds on the dimension of impact. So looking at negative and positive impact, and human rights violations would come under the negative impact. So we also recommend that the environmental and social risk management is enlarged. So the enterprise risk management, but is enlarged to environmental social risk management, which is further enlarged to impact management and creation as well. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Ghislaine? If not, thank you very much, Ghislaine, for this long session. And we are now coming close to the end of today's webinar. So I will now pass the mic to Dr. Srikanya Yathip, Secretary General at the Government Pension Fund, to make the closing remarks. Over to you, Dr. Srikanya.
Okay. Thank you, Yuki. Thank you very much. I think from now on there would be only Thai participants, so I speak in Thai. If it's okay for you, Yuki.
Yes, I will put in the translation on. So if there are any English-speaking participants, choose the English in your language selection.
ก็ต้องขอกราบขอบพระคุณท่านผู้มีเกียรตินะคะที่อยู่ร่วมกับเรามาจนถึงนาทีนี้นะคะตอนนี้ก็มี participant ประมาณ180กว่าท่านที่อยู่กับเราตั้งแต่เช้าจนกระทั่งถึงเซสชันสุดท้ายนะคะสำหรับเซสชันนี้จะใช้เวลาแค่ประมาณ5นาทีเท่านั้นเองนะคะที่จะสรุปรายละเอียดสำคัญแล้วก็สิ่งที่กบข.จะสามารถช่วยท่านผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านที่ร่วมงานเซมินาของเราในวันนี้นะคะได้ข้อมูลเพิ่มเติมมากขึ้นนะคะขออนุญาตไปที่หน้าแรกที่ได้เตรียมไว้นะคะรบกวนทีมเปิดหน้าแรกด้วยค่ะ PowerPoint ค่ะนะคะขอไปหน้าถัดไปเลยนะคะสำหรับวันนี้นะคะ Key Takeaway ที่ทางกบข.จะขอเรียนสรุปท่านผู้มีเกียรตินะคะที่ร่วมกับสัมมนาของเราก็จะมีต่อไปนี้นะคะประเด็นแรกที่เราได้ยินมานะคะจากสปีกเกอร์ท่านแรกของเรานะคะก็คือคุณฮาพิษซึ่งมาจาก UNDP นะคะ Key Message สำคัญที่เราได้ยินแล้วเรารู้สึกว่าชอบนะคือการที่ท่านพูดว่า justice delay is justice denied ก็คือถ้าเราให้เห็นความสำคัญเกี่ยวกับเรื่อง human rights ว่าเป็นเรื่องสำคัญแล้วเนี่ย เราก็ไม่ควรจะดีเลย์ประเด็นนี้ควรจะต้องร่วมมือกันทำแล้วก็เริ่มกันไปนะคะสิ่งสำคัญที่ได้ยินอีก2 message สำคัญก็คือว่า policy commitment ไม่สามารถจะ develop in isolation เราควรจะทำอันร่วมกันนะคะสำหรับวันนี้ก็เป็นนิมิตหมายอันหนึ่งที่กบข.กับหลายๆหน่วยงานก็มาร่วมกันที่จะทำเรื่องนี้เป็นจริงจังของประเทศไทยนะคะและ mediation ตรงนี้ก็มีหลายประเด็นที่ท่านได้พูดถึงนะคะสรุปก็ได้ใจความดังนี้อันที่1ก็คือว่า require active engagement เวลาเราพูดถึง active engagement เนี่ยหลายคนก็ตั้งข้อสงสัยว่ามันหมายถึงอะไรนะคะถ้าจากนิยามของคุณฮาพรีตเนี่ยเราก็สรุปได้ว่าหมายถึงเราต้องมั่นใจว่า remedy ที่เราเข้าไปจัดการในธุรกิจที่เราดูแลเนี่ยนะคะจะต้องเกิด timely และ effective อันนี้ก็เป็น2 key message สำคัญที่ได้จากวันนี้นะคะแล้วก็ในการ remediation เนี่ยสามารถทำได้หลากหลายรูปแบบสามารถทำ through process แล้วก็หลาย mechanism มากแล้วก็สามารถ leverage ไปสู่กระบวนการของการ prevent หรือ mitigate ได้นะคะcollaboration เป็นอะไรที่สปีกเกอร์ทุกท่านพูดถึงมากๆเลยนะคะว่าการจะทำอะไรที่เป็นงานใหญ่ขนาดนี้เนี่ยไม่มีองค์กรใดองค์กรหนึ่งสามารถทำได้เพียงลำพังต้อง collaborate กันนะคะซึ่งกบข.ก็มองว่าอันนี้ก็เป็นจุดเริ่มต้นที่ดีที่หลายๆองค์กรที่เกี่ยวข้องกับการลงทุนรับผิดชอบตั้งแต่ต้นน้ำถึงปลายน้ำเนี่ยสามารถมา collaborate ร่วมกันได้ค่ะไปหน้าถัดไปนะคะขอไปหน้าถัดไปค่ะนะคะตรงนี้ก็จะเป็นลิงก์นะคะตรงนี้หลายๆท่านก็อาจจะไม่ได้ตามตั้งแต่ต้นตรงที่มีลิงก์อยู่ในแชทต่างๆนะคะกบข.ก็เลยสรุปลิงก์หลักๆต่างๆแล้วเนี่ยไว้ให้นะคะซึ่งเดี๋ยวตอนเสร็จเซมินาแล้วเดี๋ยวจะรวบรวมให้ไฟล์นะให้ดูดีนิดนึงแล้วเดี๋ยวจะส่งให้Attendant ทุกท่านได้รับทราบแล้วก็ลิงก์ข้อมูลทั้งหมดได้ค่ะหน้าถัดไปเลยค่ะสปีกเกอร์ท่านนี้บาบาร่านะคะบาบาร่ากับกบข.เนี่ยค่อนข้างจะสนิทกันมากนะคะบาบาร่าได้มีโอกาสมาที่กบข.แล้วก็มาเล่าเรื่องเฟรมเวิร์กตรงนี้ให้เราฟัง OECD Guiding Principle ตัวนี้นะคะซึ่งกบข.เองเนี่ยก็ใช้หลักการของ OECD เนี่ยค่ะมาเป็นเฟรมเวิร์กในการdesign investment process ของกบข.ทั้งหมดนะคะซึ่งถ้าparticipant ท่านใดนะคะมีความประสงค์อยากจะได้คุณบาบาร่านะคะมาช่วยให้คำแนะนำหรือมาพูดคุยเพิ่มเติมเนี่ยแจ้งมาที่เราได้นะคะถ้าสมมติว่าเรามีอีเวนต์ร่วมกับคุณบาบาร่ามาที่เมืองไทยนะคะเราก็อาจจะจัดเซสชันนี้ขึ้นมาแล้วก็จะเรียนเชิญมาที่กบข.มาฟังท่านอธิบายในรายละเอียดเพิ่มขึ้นตอนที่คุณบาบาร่ามาอธิบาย process นี้ให้เราฟังก็ใช้เวลาอยู่ครึ่งวันนะคะจะอธิบายรายละเอียดทั้งหมดซึ่งก็สามารถซักถามดีเทลได้แต่สำหรับวันนี้นะคะเราก็ได้ไปค้นข้อมูลเพิ่มเติมให้แล้วก็ทำลิงก์มาให้ด้วยนะคะในหน้าถัดไปนะคะแล้วกดหน้าถัดไปก็จะเป็นสเต็ปที่บาบาร่าพูดถึงนะคะซึ่งเราก็จะเอาตัวย่อๆมาให้นะคะหน้าถัดไปเลยค่ะนะคะ2 3ทั้งหมดมี6สเต็ปนะคะต่อไปเลยค่ะนะคะแล้วก็ข้างล่างที่มีเขียนตรง6สเต็ปที่6เขากลับไปนิดนึงค่ะตรงสเต็ปที่6นะคะตรงด้านล่างสุดจะมีเขียนว่า mediation by NCP นะคะคือ OECD เนี่ยมีทีมที่เขาเรียกว่า National Contact Point สำหรับดูแลเรื่องนี้โดยเฉพาะนะคะก็จะเป็นกลไกที่สำคัญมากๆแล้วก็ NCP ก็จะเป็นกลไกที่ดูแลเรื่องแบบนี้ในประเทศต่างๆนะประเทศไทยไม่แน่ใจว่ามีใครเป็น National Contact Point อยู่นะคะตอนนี้ค่ะต่อไปเลยค่ะตรงนี้ก็จะเป็นรีพอร์ตของ OECD ที่บาบาร่าพูดถึงนะคะซึ่งในเอกสารที่เราจะส่งให้ทุกท่านเนี่ยก็จะมีลิงก์สำหรับด็อกิเมนต์ตรงนี้สามารถดาวน์โหลดเอามาใช้ประโยชน์ได้ค่ะนะคะอีกท่านหนึ่งนะคะแมทธิวนะคะจาก PRI นะคะแมทธิวพูดในคีย์เมสเสจสำคัญที่เราคิดว่าน่าสนใจก็คือการพูดว่า human right เนี่ยเป็น universal right เป็นสิทธิของทุกๆคนและเป็นสิทธิที่เป็นสากลแล้วก็มีความ interrelated กันหลายๆอย่างนะคะอีกอันนึงประเด็นสำคัญที่แมทธิวพูดถึงก็คือ definition ของ human right นะคะซึ่งก็ให้รายละเอียดชัดเจนว่าประกอบไปด้วย right to organize right to equal pay right to living wage prevention of discrimination right to privacy แล้วก็ right to water and sanitation นะคะนี่ก็เป็นอะไรที่มีความรายละเอียดชัดเจนของ definition สำหรับ report ที่คุณแมทธิวได้พูดถึงคือ why and how investors should act on human rights เราก็ไปค้นลิงก์มาให้แล้วนะคะเดี๋ยวก็จะส่งไปให้พร้อมกันกับสรุปตัวนี้นะคะคุณแมทธิวก็ได้พูดถึงว่านักลงทุนสถาบันจะสามารถทำอะไรได้บ้างใน3ประเด็นด้วยกันนะคะตั้งแต่ทำ policy due diligence process และ access to remedy ในรีพอร์ตที่เราจะส่งไปให้ที่มีลิงก์เนี่ยนะคะก็จะมีดีเทลทั้งหมดให้ท่านผู้มีเกียรตินะคะสามารถไปอ่านเพิ่มเติมได้ถ้าสนใจนะคะ ซึ่งในรีพอร์ตหน้าถัดไปแล้วรีพอร์ตเนี่ยก็จะมีดีเทลที่น่าสนใจมากๆก็สามารถจะมองเห็นเป็นโฟลว์ได้เลยค่ะว่าในแง่ของนักลงทุนที่เกี่ยวข้องตั้งแต่โฟลว์ตั้งแต่ต้นน้ำถึงปลายน้ำเนี่ยเราจะสามารถเข้าไป invoke หรือว่า human rights จะเกี่ยวข้องในพาร์ทไหนได้บ้างนะคะอันนี้ก็เป็นพรีวิวของรีพอร์ตค่ะมาถึงจุดนี้ค่ะในรีพอร์ตมีการพูดถึงตรงนี้ด้วยนะคะว่าในการทำอะไรก็แล้วแต่ที่ PRI ให้ความสำคัญเนี่ยก็จะมองว่าสเต็ปที่1หรือ year 1เนี่ยจะต้อง seek understanding เข้าไปในคนที่เกี่ยวข้อง stakeholder ทั้งหมดนะคะแล้วก็พยายามจะ transform industry ไปที่ทิศทางเดียวกันสุดท้ายก็เกิด full respect ของประเด็นนี้นะคะเราก็เลยมามองว่าวันนี้ค่ะที่เรามาสัมมนาร่วมกันมาคุยกันเนี่ยมันอาจจะเป็นสเต็ปแรกของพวกเรานะคะที่จะ seek understanding ในเรื่องของ human right integration แล้วก็การมอง human right เป็น risk factor ในเรื่องของการลงทุน next step ของเราก็อาจจะหมายถึงการที่เราพยายามจะทำ common framework ด้วยกันพยายามทำ heat map ด้วยกันนะคะก็คือเรากำลังช่วยกัน transform industry ในประเทศไทยให้ความสำคัญเรื่อง human right มากขึ้นและท้ายที่สุดแล้วเนี่ยก็อาจจะสร้าง full respect ได้สักวันหนึ่งถ้าเราร่วมมือกันไปเรื่อยๆแบบนี้ค่ะอีกท่านหนึ่งนะคะโรสแมรี่นะคะโรสแมรี่ก็จะลงสู่ที่ practical case แล้วนะคะซึ่งก็มีข้อมูลน่าสนใจมากๆเลยนะคะสิ่งหนึ่งที่โรสแมรี่พูดแล้วก็เป็นสิ่งที่กบข.คิดเหมือนกันก็คือว่าการ integrate human right ก็คือการ integrate ใน risk management นะคะแล้วก็คุณโรสแมรี่ก็พูดถึง modern slavery disclosure ด้วยซึ่งเดี๋ยววันที่2คือวันที่2สัมมนาคือวันที่4มีนาเนี่ยนะคะกบข.ก็จะพูดเรื่อง modern slavery ด้วยว่าเรามีการดูแลยังไงผ่าน external fund manager ของเรานะคะซึ่งคุณโรสแมรี่ก็ได้พูด definition ของ modern slavery ไว้ค่อนข้างจะชัดเจนก็เลยนำมาสรุปไว้ในที่นี้นะคะมีตั้งแต่ human right trafficking slavery of servitude forced และก็ compulsory labor forced begging debt bondage debt bondage เนี่ยเป็นอะไรที่กบข.เองต้องเรียนว่านึกไม่ถึงนะคะว่าการมองว่าการที่สถาบันการเงินเนี่ยปล่อยกู้ให้กับผู้กู้มากๆแล้วเนี่ยการสร้าง debt bondage เนี่ยก็การเป็นการเขาเรียก deprive ของ human right ของผู้กู้ด้วยเช่นกันนี่เป็นประเด็นที่น่าสนใจมากนะคะ forced marriage แล้วก็ child labor อันนี้ก็ตามนั้นนะคะในตัวสรุปนะคะคุณโรสแมรี่ก็บอกว่าเราสามารถสรุปได้เป็น4 key idea นะคะในเรื่องของ modern slavery forced to work owned or controlled by employer นะคะ dehumanize แล้วก็เป็น physical constraint นะคะอันนี้ก็ว่าไปอีกประเด็นหนึ่งเป็นคีย์เวิร์ดที่เราก็ไม่เคยได้ยินมานะคะแต่เราก็รู้สึกว่าเป็นคำที่น่าสนใจเราชอบพูดถึงว่า ESG factor หรือ human rights factor เรามองหา materiality ของ factor เหล่านั้นแต่เราก็ไม่เคยนึกว่าตัวเราเองนี่แหละเรียกว่า material risk owner นะคะก็เป็นคีย์เวิร์ดที่น่าสนใจที่คุณโรสแมรี่พูดถึงก็เลยอยากจะหยิบมาวางเอาไว้ตรงนี้นะคะในฐานะเป็น material risk owner เนี่ยบทบาทแล้วก็ถูกคาดหวังว่าเราจะต้องสร้าง empathy ขึ้นมาสร้าง process สร้าง control ขึ้นมาที่จะได้มองเห็นปัญหาพวกนี้ monitor ด้วยกันนะคะในส่วนของ key element สำหรับการทำ risk management process เนี่ยคุณโรสแมรี่ก็มองว่ามันก็เป็นกระบวนการนะเริ่มต้นจาก be inform ก่อนนะคะต้องบอกให้ทราบ identify ให้ได้ว่า ESG risk อยู่ที่ตรงไหนแล้วก็ set risk appetite ขึ้นมานะคะแล้วมาทำ policy manage risk monitor แล้วก็ report ในส่วนกบข.เองเนี่ยเราให้ความสำคัญกับ monitoring มากเพราะว่าเราเป็นหน่วยงานลงทุนซึ่งเราก็จะลงทุนผ่านคนอื่นนั่นการ monitor ที่สำคัญเกี่ยวกับเรื่องพวกนี้จะ reflect มาซึ่งสิ่งที่เรากำลังให้ความสนใจอยู่ว่าได้มีการดูแลจัดการแค่ไหนซึ่งเดี๋ยวจะมีการพูดถึงอย่างลงรายละเอียดในวันที่4นะคะแล้วก็รีวิวสุดท้ายก็กลับมาที่ inform อีกเหมือนกันนะคะในส่วนของ business connection นะคะคุณโรสแมรี่ได้ตั้ง framework ไว้สำคัญมากที่น่าสนใจมากเป็นการตั้งคำถามและชวนทำต่อนะคะเช่นตั้งคำถามว่า if a company แล้วก็ ได้สร้างปัญหาให้เกิดขึ้นหรือสร้าง impact ให้เกิดขึ้นเดนเราควรจะทำอย่างไรเราควรจะ prevent หรือ mitigate หรือว่าจะจัดการ impact นี้ยังไงนะคะและสุดท้ายจะ remedy the harm ได้ยังไงซึ่งเป็น framework ของการตั้งคำถามง่ายๆซึ่งก็มองว่ามันก็เป็นแนวทางให้กับนักลงทุนอย่างเราหรือกิจการที่กบข.ลงทุนเนี่ยเอาใช้ไปเป็นไอเดียในการดีไซน์ในการทำ due diligence หรือการ integrate human right factor ไปในกระบวนการลงทุนได้ค่ะนะคะสิ่งที่คุณโรสแมรี่ทำให้เพิ่มเติมนะคะก็คือการเอา regulatory ต่างๆมาแมปให้ดูแล้วก็มองให้เห็นว่า regulatory ต่างๆเหล่านั้นเนี่ยมีประเด็นอะไรที่ cover บ้างนะคะซึ่งเดี๋ยวกบข.ก็จะพยายามจะหา regulatory เหล่านี้นะคะเดี๋ยวถ้าเจอลิงก์ก็จะส่งให้ท่านผู้มีเกียรติได้อ่านด้วยกันนะคะแล้วก็ possible exposure สำหรับ point สำหรับ modern slavery นะคะสำหรับประเด็นนี้วางไว้เป็นเฟรมง่ายๆนะคะแต่ถ้าดูจริงๆแล้วยังมีดีเทลอีกมากมายที่เราอยากจะคุยกับคุณโรสแมรี่เพิ่มเติมนะคะว่าexposure เหล่านี้ไม่ว่าจะเป็น operation relationship advisor ต่างๆนานาเนี่ย มันเป็นโอกาสที่จะสร้างmodern slavery ได้ยังไงและจัดการยังไงนะคะอันนี้ก็เป็นอะไรที่คิดว่ายังเป็นคำถามให้เราจะต้อง explore เพิ่มเติมในอนาคตนะคะในส่วนของประเด็นเรื่อง managing modern slavery risks นะคะคุณโรสแมรี่ก็ได้ให้รายละเอียดเพิ่มเติมว่าสำหรับ NAB แล้วเนี่ยก็มีการทำในคอนเซปต์ของ risk based approach นะคะเข้าใจแล้วก็ access ต่างๆซึ่งก็มีรายละเอียดตามนี้นะคะคุณโรสแมรี่ได้พูดถึง Equator Principle ด้วยนะคะซึ่งเราก็เจอลิงก์แล้วนะคะแล้วก็เจอไฟล์เอกสารแล้วนะคะตรงนี้ก็สรุปเป็นหน้าสารบัญให้ก่อนว่ามีอะไรบ้างนะคะแต่เดี๋ยวท่านผู้มีเกียรติที่ได้รับไฟล์ลิงก์จากเราไปก็จะสามารถดาวน์โหลดไฟล์เหล่านี้ได้ค่ะท่านต่อไปนะคะใจดีฟนะคะก่อนที่เราได้คุยคุณใจดีฟซึ่งท่านไม่มี presentation นะคะท่านก็ได้พูดให้เราฟังว่า APG ซึ่งเป็น Dutch Pension Fund เป็น Global Asset Management เนี่ยมี multiple asset classes เนี่ยได้มีการดูแลอย่างไรจริงๆแล้วเมื่อฟัง APG พูดก็คล้ายๆกบข.นะคะเราเป็น long term investor เพราะฉะนั้นเราก็เลยมี long term liability ESG framework ก็จะเป็นอะไรที่เป็น framework ที่เรามองในระยะยาวนะคะหลักคิดสำคัญของคุณใจดีฟที่พูดถึงก็คือการมองเรื่อง inclusion approach ทุกอย่างก็มองว่า include เป็น one aspect นะคะแล้วก็ถ้าวิธีการจัดการวิธีการดูแลเนี่ยก็คือเข้าไป engage ให้มากที่สุดนะคะ main framework เนี่ยที่ทางคุณใจดีพูดถึงก็จะมี2 main framework corporate governance แล้วก็เรื่อง human rights นะคะในแง่ของการ implementation ของอาเซียนพอดีคุณยูกิถามถึงว่ามองอาเซียนยังไงนะคะที่คุณใจดีมองก็ยังมองว่าตอนนี้ก็ยังอยู่ก็อยู่ในระดับที่ว่ายังมี improve point ได้อีกนะคะแต่ว่า local investor เนี่ยคุณใจดีก็มองว่าทุกคนก็พยายามที่จะ up to global standard ก็เป็นอะไรที่น่าชื่นชมนะคะเราก็ยังมี challenge ที่จะต้อง cover ด้วยกันในอนาคตนะคะ question ก็คือว่า landscape เนี่ยจะ changing ไปในทิศทางไหนซึ่งในส่วนตัวเองก็มองว่า changing ไปในทิศทางที่เป็น positive อยู่ค่ะสุดท้ายนะคะวิทยากรท่านสุดท้ายที่มาพูดให้เราฟังคริสเลนนะคะซึ่งมาด้วยวิธีการที่น่าสนใจมากๆเลยเป็นการยก case study นะคะเพื่อจะinstill ไอเดียให้เราคิดต่อนะคะว่าถ้าเราจะพูดถึง human rights เนี่ยถ้าเอา case study ตัวนึงมาเป็นเคสตัวตั้งต้นเช่นpalm oil แล้วเนี่ยเราสามารถมองในมิติที่สำคัญ2มิติยังไงได้บ้างนะคะสรุปเป็นสาระสำคัญที่คุณคริสเลนพูดถึงนะคะก็คือว่าการจะ identify หรือ access adverse human rights impact เนี่ยเป็นอะไรที่ complicate มากแล้วก็ involve many player เลยทีเดียวไม่ได้เป็นอะไรที่ involve คนเดียวที่จะทำตรงนี้ได้นะคะการที่เราจะสร้าง leverage สำหรับการบริหารจัดการเรื่อง human rights เนี่ยในองค์กรเราเนี่ยก็สามารถทำได้หลายวิธีการด้วยกันไม่ว่าจะเป็นการไม่เข้าไปยุ่งเกี่ยวนะคะหรือ prevent หรือ mitigate หรือ leverage ด้วยวิธีการ set tone on the top มีการทำ policy ขึ้นมาทั้งภายนอกและภายในนะคะ engage กับ client หรือว่าไป engage กับ NGO ซึ่งการไป engage กับ NGO เนี่ยนะคะสถาบันหน่วยงานที่เรากบข.ไปลงทุนด้วยในต่างประเทศนะคะก็ให้ความสำคัญเรื่อง engage กับ NGO มากๆเขาก็มองว่า NGO ก็เป็นแหล่งรวมของข้อมูลที่สำคัญที่นักลงทุนอย่างเราอาจจะไม่มีเวลาไปรวบรวมนะคะ leverage tool อื่นที่น่าสนใจที่เรามองนะคะสำหรับกบข.เองก็มองว่าการไปเอา human rights factor เนี่ยไปลิงก์กับ KPI องค์กรเลยนะคะซึ่งตรงนี้ก็จะเป็นอะไรที่จะผูกมัดองค์กรที่น่าสนใจนะคะสำหรับ closing วันนี้ก็ขอจะเรียนสรุปท่านผู้มีเกียรติที่อยู่กับเราถึงนาทีนี้แค่ประมาณนี้ก่อนนะคะอย่างที่เรียนคือเอกสารทั้งหมดที่วิทยากรได้พูดถึงเดี๋ยวทางกบข.จะรวบรวมให้นะคะแล้วจะรีบทำงานแล้วก็ส่งไปให้ท่านผู้มีเกียรติที่อยู่ร่วมกับเราในวันนี้นะคะแล้วก็ถ้าเกิดว่ามีอะไรที่กบข.สามารถประสานหรือหาเพิ่มเติมหรือเชื่อมวิทยากรท่านอื่นมาให้ได้นะคะก็ไม่ต้องเกรงใจบอกมานะคะกบข.ก็จะสามารถถ้าเราทำได้นะคะเราก็จะเชิญท่านเหล่านั้นมานะคะในจังหวะที่เหมาะสมแล้วก็อาจจะมีเซมินาร์ร่วมกันอีกครั้งหนึ่งทั้งที่เป็นออนไลน์แบบนี้และทั้งที่มาเจอกันที่สักสถานที่หนึ่งเพื่อพูดคุยกันอย่างแลกเปลี่ยนความคิดเห็นตรงไปตรงมาต่อหน้ากันนะคะก็สุดท้ายแล้วนะคะก็ในนามของกบข.นามของตลาดหลักทรัพย์ในนามของ UN คุณยูกินะคะก็จะขอกราบขอบพระคุณท่านผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านที่อยู่ร่วมกับเรามาถึงนาทีสุดท้ายในวันนี้นะคะก็เดี๋ยวเจอกันอีกครั้งนะคะวันที่4ค่ะขอบคุณค่ะสวัสดีค่ะ
Srikanya, and
yes.
I echo Dr. Srikanya to say that we had a very good session today. Thank you for your participation. We will resume at 10:30 Bangkok time on Thursday for another day of packed with distinguished speakers. So we look forward to your participation, and goodbye for today. The webinar is now closed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.